There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after 70 years of noise. It's not peace. It's a presence, a heavy blanket that smothers every room. My husband, Arthur, he was the noise. His laughter, the sound of his workshop in the garage, even the gentle rumble of his snoring. When he left, he took all the sounds of this house with him, and what he left behind is a silence so profound it has a weight. For a year, I've been living with this silence as my only companion. People think that at 95 you've made your peace with endings. They think you're just waiting quietly in a comfortable chair. But they don't understand the difference between waiting for an end and being erased before you get there. I learned that difference a few months ago on the cold, hard floor of my basement. It was then I realized the silence wasn't just sad, it was hungry, and it was waiting to swallow me whole. This house is no longer a home. It's a museum of a life I used to share. Every object has a story, a ghost attached to it. The worn spot on the arm of Arthur's favorite chair, the chipped teacup from our first anniversary, the faint pencil marks on the door frame where we measured our daughter's height. I am the curator of it all, wandering through the exhibits of my own past. But a curator is supposed to share the stories, and I have no one left to tell them to. My daughter, bless her heart, sees only the dangers. She sees the steep stairs, the rugs I could trip on, the crushing solitude. She doesn't see that this place, this beautiful memory-filled trap, is the last thing tethering me to the woman I was. She wants to move me to a safe place, a place where the silence is managed with scheduled activities and the quiet hum of medical equipment. She thinks she's saving my life, but I'm terrified she's trying to get me to surrender to a different kind of end. My days have a rhythm, a quiet, fragile beat set by the sun and the aches in my joints. I wake up when the first light hits the dust motes dancing in the air, the same way Arthur used to. The first thing I do is listen. I listen for his breathing, for the rustle of the newspaper, for the whistle of the kettle. But the only sound is the hum of the old refrigerator and the steady, lonely tap, tap, tap of my cane on the hardwood floor as I make my way to the kitchen. I boil just enough water for 1 cup of tea, using the chipped porcelain mug he bought me at a street fair 50 years ago. I sit at the great oak table in my usual spot and stare at his empty chair across from me. Sometimes I tell him about my night, about the strange dreams I had. I know it's foolish talking to an empty chair, but it's the only conversation I have all day. The rest of the morning is spent dusting memories, his reading glasses on the nightstand, the ship in a bottle on the mantelpiece he spent a whole winter building. I am the sole keeper of these small sacred histories, and the weight of them is a comfort and a curse. My daughter Sarah calls every day at 10. I love her dearly, but her voice is laced with a gentle anxiety that makes me feel like a problem to be solved. Did you take your pills, Mom? Is there enough food in the house? You shouldn't be going down to the basement alone. Each question is a small chip at the foundation of my independence. She doesn't understand that this house, with its treacherous stairs and its drafty windows, is the last piece of myself I have left. Since the fall, her worry has become a constant humming presence in my life, a reminder of my own fragility. I'll be sitting in the living room watching the neighborhood children play outside, and the memory of that cold, hard floor will rise up and steal my breath. It wasn't the pain that terrified me. It was the chilling thought that I could lie there for days and the world would simply go on. The silence I had been living with suddenly had teeth. It wasn't just an absence of sound anymore. It was a predator waiting for me to become small enough, quiet enough to be swallowed completely. Sarah sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd learned to read, her hands wrapped around a mug I wasn't using. She spoke with a careful softness, the kind you use for frightened animals or very old people. "Mom, we need to be practical," she began, laying out brochures on the polished oak surface. The pictures showed smiling, silver-haired people playing bingo and sitting in pristine gardens. "It's safe. There are nurses. You wouldn't have to worry about the stairs anymore." Each word was a gentle nail in the coffin of my life as I knew it. She saw a problem of logistics, of safety protocols and fall risks. She didn't see the woman sitting across from her. She didn't understand that the stairs were less frightening than the slow, sterile erasure she was offering me as a solution. I just nodded, the weight of her love feeling heavier than any loneliness I had ever known. She thought she was building a fortress for me, but all I could see were the walls of a very comfortable prison closing in. The place was called Willow Creek Gardens, a name that promised nature and tranquility, but smelled only of bleach and air freshener. The silence here was different from the silence in my house. My silence was heavy with memory. This was a thin, sterile quiet, punctuated by the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum and the distant muffled drone of a television. A cheerful woman with a laminated name tag showed us around. "Here's our activity room," she chirped, pointing to a room where a few residents sat in a circle, not speaking, just watching a game show with the volume turned low. The walls were painted a placid beige, a color designed to offend no one and inspire nothing. There were no chipped teacups here, no worn armchairs, no pencil marks on the door frames. It was a place scrubbed clean of life, a collection of rooms where people came to wait. My hand tightened on my cane, the carved wood a familiar anchor in this sea of polite, soulless emptiness. As we walked down a long sunlit hallway, I saw her. An elderly woman, smaller than me, was sitting in a wheelchair parked by a large window that overlooked a perfectly manicured lawn. She wasn't looking at the lawn, though. Her gaze was fixed on something far away, something none of us could see. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. She wasn't sad or angry or anything really. She was simply absent. In her vacant stare, I saw my own future reflected back at me. I saw the end of stories, the fading of memories, the final surrender to invisibility. And in that chilling moment, a thought came to me, so clear and cold it stole my breath. This isn't a home, it's a waiting room. And everyone here in their comfortable chairs and clean rooms is just waiting for the same train to arrive. Sarah was talking about the excellent meal plan, but I couldn't hear her over the silent scream that had just erupted inside my own head. On the drive home, Sarah was optimistic. "It's nice, isn't it, Mom? Clean. The staff seems so friendly." I didn't answer. I just watched the familiar houses of my neighborhood blur past the window, each one a universe of noise and mess and life, each one a home. A hard truth began to settle in my bones, a piece of wisdom you only earn after a long, long life. We spend all our years building a home, filling it with love and arguments and the smell of baking bread, only to be told at the end that it's no longer safe for us. What they don't tell you is that sometimes the safe places are the most dangerous places for your soul. By the time we pulled into my driveway, the fear that had been haunting me for a year had finally burned away, leaving behind something else. It was a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to be a ghost in my own house. but I certainly wasn't going to become a patient in theirs. The silence in my home was a predator, yes, but I was not its prey, not yet. That night I didn't sleep. The image of that woman in the window at Willow Creek Gardens was burned into my mind. I saw myself in her vacant stare, a final faded photograph in a forgotten album. The next morning, fueled by a desperation I hadn't felt in years, I did something completely insane. At the little grocery store down the street, tacked to a corkboard between an ad for a lost cat and a lawn mowing service, was a small handwritten flyer. 3 responsible university students seeking quiet room for rent. I stood there for a long time, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for one of the little tear-off phone numbers at the bottom. The paper felt flimsy, insignificant, but in my palm it held the weight of a life raft. Making that call was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. My voice shook as I spoke, offering up the quiet, empty rooms of my house, my sanctuary, my prison. It was a reckless gamble, a leap into an unknown abyss, but it was a choice, my choice. And for the first time in a year, it felt better than waiting. They arrived on a Saturday, a whirlwind of noise and nervous energy that blasted through my silent home like a storm. 3 young women, Maya, Chloe, and Jessica, with overflowing cardboard boxes, tangled charging cables, and the kind of vibrant, chaotic life I had long forgotten. The front door, which had only opened for Sarah's worried visits, was propped open for hours, letting in the autumn air and the sound of their laughter. They filled the kitchen with the smell of burnt toast and cheap coffee. Music I didn't recognize drifted down the hallways from a tiny speaker. My carefully curated silence was shattered into a million pieces. That first night, I sat in Arthur's armchair, the house thrumming with a life that wasn't mine, and I felt a profound sense of regret. What have I done? I had invited the world back into my home, and I was terrified it would trample the ghosts I had so carefully preserved. I was no longer the keeper of a quiet museum. I was an unwilling landlord in a crowded dormitory. The first week was a study in contrasts, a collision of 2 worlds under one roof. My slow, deliberate mornings were now punctuated by the frantic rush of someone running late for an 8 a.m. lecture. My pristine living room became a landscape of discarded textbooks and laptops. I would find a single sock under the dining room table or a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter, and a wave of irritation would wash over me. This was Arthur's house, our house. But then I would catch myself watching them. I'd see Maya hunched over her notes, her brow furrowed in concentration, and I'd remember Sarah doing the same at that very table. I'd hear Chloe on the phone, her voice full of drama as she recounted her day to a friend, and a faint echo of my own youth would stir. I was an outsider in my own home, yes, but I was also a witness. The silence was gone, replaced by this messy, unpredictable, and undeniably alive chaos. And I began to wonder which was more dangerous, the noise of strangers or the suffocating quiet of being utterly alone. The house at 2 a.m. had a new kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, empty silence of Arthur's absence, but a softer, breathing quiet, filled with the gentle rhythms of 3 young lives asleep upstairs. I was awake, of course. Sleep is a fickle friend at my age. I was sitting in my chair listening to the old house settle when I heard it, a small choked sound from the kitchen. It wasn't a sound of danger, it was a sound of grief, raw and private. My first thought wasn't fear, but a strange protective instinct. I reached for my cane. the smooth wood familiar in my palm, and pushed myself to my feet. Every joint protested, but my feet knew the way through the darkness. The tap, tap, tap of my cane on the floorboards felt different tonight. It wasn't the lonely echo of a ghost. It was the sound of someone walking toward a purpose, however small. I found Maya at the big oak table, the one Arthur and I bought at an antique fair 60 years ago. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The screen of her laptop cast a cold blue light on the scattered textbooks and crumpled notes. It was a picture of youthful despair, so potent and overwhelming, it felt like a memory from my own life. A failed exam, a broken heart, a dream that felt impossibly far away. The reasons change, but the feeling is timeless. I didn't say a word. What could I possibly say that would matter? Instead, an old, forgotten instinct took over, a muscle memory from a lifetime of being a wife and a mother. I turned and walked to the counter, my movements slow but sure. I filled the kettle with water, my hands steady for the first time in what felt like a year. I was not thinking, I was simply doing. The whistle of the kettle was the only sound in the kitchen. It was a sound I hadn't heard in the middle of the night since Sarah was a teenager, cramming for her finals. I poured the steaming water over a tea bag in my favorite chipped mug, not his, but mine, and carried it to the table. I set it down gently on the wood in front of her. Maya looked up, her eyes red and swollen, a startled expression on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, a tectonic plate of my soul grinding into a new position. All this time I had been the one receiving care, the object of my daughter's worry, a fragile thing to be managed. But here, in the dim light of my own kitchen, I wasn't a patient. I wasn't a problem to be solved or a risk to be mitigated. I was the one holding the cup. I was the one offering comfort. We sat there in a comfortable quiet, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. She sipped her tea, and I just sat, my hands resting on my cane. I didn't offer advice or tell her it would all be okay. I just offered her my presence, a quiet anchor in her storm. And as I watched her, I finally understood the truth that had been hiding from me all along. My daughter, in her love, wanted to wrap me in safety. But safety is a cage if it means you have nothing left to offer. What I had been mourning wasn't just Arthur or the noise or my own strength. I was mourning my own usefulness, my purpose, the deep human need to matter to someone else. In that quiet kitchen, I wasn't the frail old woman who had fallen down the stairs. I was the woman who knew how to make a perfect cup of tea for a girl with a broken heart. And I realized with a clarity that felt like the sun rising that my story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. The next morning, the sunlight felt different. It didn't just illuminate the dust motes of the past. It seemed to carry the sound of the girl's hurried footsteps from upstairs, a chaotic but welcome rhythm. The mess that had once felt like an invasion now felt like a pulse, a heartbeat that wasn't mine, but had become part of my home's new song. I looked at Arthur's empty armchair, the worn fabric holding the shape of his absence, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a tombstone in my living room. It was just a chair, a good, sturdy chair waiting for someone to sit in it. I realized I had been guarding ghosts, protecting a silence that was starving me. These girls, with their loud music and their frantic lives, weren't desecrating a sacred space. They were unknowingly performing an exorcism, chasing away the heavy, suffocating quiet with the simple, beautiful noise of being alive. I was no longer the curator of a museum. I was simply living in my house again. A few days later, a memory surfaced. The recipe for Arthur's favorite banana bread, written in my looping cursive on a faded index card. My hands, stiff with age, fumbled with the flour and sugar, but there was a forgotten purpose in their movements. It was a slow, deliberate dance I hadn't performed in years. The house, which had only smelled of lemon polish and old paper, slowly filled with the warm, sweet scent of cinnamon and baking bread. When the girls came home from their classes, they followed the smell into the kitchen like children, their faces lighting up with a genuine, uncomplicated delight. As we sat around the oak table sharing slices of the warm bread, their laughter filled the room. It was a sound so full and real it pushed back against the silence in every corner. In that simple exchange, my bread for their laughter, I understood. Vitality isn't about being taken care of. It's about having something to give. When Sarah called that evening, her voice filled with its usual gentle worry, I heard it differently. Her love was real, but her plan was rooted in fear. She wanted to build me a fortress against death, but in doing so, she would have locked out life. I finally had the words for the truth that had been stuck in my throat. We spend our whole lives building a home, only to be told at the end that it's no longer safe for us. What they don't tell you is that the safe places, the ones scrubbed clean of risk and memory and purpose, are the most dangerous places for your soul. I wasn't fighting against my daughter. I was fighting for the right to matter. This house, with its creaky floors and its 3 noisy, wonderful tenants, was no longer a trap. It was my anchor. I had found my new we, and in their chaotic, vibrant presence, I had found the safest place on earth. I keep the little flyer from the grocery store tucked inside Arthur's favorite book of poems. Sometimes I take it out. This flimsy piece of paper with its tear-off phone number feels heavier than my house keys. It didn't just unlock a door, it unlocked the rest of my life. My daughter, in her boundless love, saw a problem to be solved with safety in sterile hallways. She saw a body that needed protection. She couldn't see the soul that was suffocating, starving for the simple, profound dignity of being needed. She didn't understand that I needed to be the one to make the tea, not just the one to drink it. The greatest lesson of my 95 years is this. The antidote to the fear of dying isn't safety. It's connection. It's having a reason to get out of your chair, not just a person to help you out of it. It's having someone to give the last slice of banana bread to, and hearing them say it's the best they've ever had. This house is noisy now. It's filled with the sound of frantic typing, late-night laughter, and the smell of burnt popcorn. Last week, I found Chloe asleep in Arthur's armchair, a history textbook open on her chest, and I felt nothing but a quiet, deep-seated peace. The ghosts are still here, of course. The memories are woven into the very fabric of this place, but they aren't lonely anymore. They've made room. We spend so much of our lives building walls to keep out the inevitable. We forget that those same walls are the ones that keep out the light. My final act of defiance wasn't saying no to a perfectly sensible plan. It was saying yes to a messy, unpredictable, and beautiful life, right here, until the very last page. And isn't that the only choice that truly matters in the end? Not how you will be kept safe, but how you will choose to live.